Foundation, and I blog at the Washington Note. I want to say a special greeting to many people who are watching blogs, the American Strategist, the Washington Note, the New America Foundation website, the Afghanistan Study Group website, and most importantly, I want to say a greeting again to our C-SPAN watchers who are with us today. I want to thank C-SPAN for covering and recording today's entire program. It's a great partnership we have. I also think I want to thank the staff and management of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for providing this facility. There are so many strands. We have Foreign Policy Magazine's editor who moderated the last session, Susan Glasser, who is a tenant in the New America Foundation space, but used to be based right here at Carnegie. And the gentleman I'm about to introduce, of course, was also a significant portion, one of the what I would call the big legs of numerous legs at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace when I first met him. Dimitri Simes is president and CEO of the Center for the National Interest and publisher of its foreign policy bi-monthly magazine, also called The National Interest. He was founding president of the Nixon Center, personally selected by former President Nixon. I had the privilege to serve as the founding executive director of that center and have been a friend and partner of Dimitri and his staff and team. We're here with Paul Saunders as well, executive director of the center. And when you think about the prism and the a sort of unsentimental approach to think about the hard choices that a nation needs to make about how it deploys its resources, to what ends, what crosses the line of being worth the kind of investments a state makes, how it tries to shape the international system. I think there are a few people, maybe none in my estimate, that are as good as Dimitri Simes at setting a basic framework for understanding and thinking through the hard and complex questions about national interest. As I mentioned, Dimitri served as chairman of the Center for Russian and Eurasian Programs at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where he was also a senior associate. He's a great friend, and he's an important writer and commentator. And what I love about Dimitri Simes is a willingness to go into battle, almost like a gladiator, to fight for the issues and causes that are often unpopular, to think about them and frame them way and be very, very engaged in serious debate. So I'm very pleased that on rather, sort of Steve Clemens' time, we call just-in-time production, Dimitri accepted our invitation and will be joining us to share some thoughts on this. We'll have some question and answer, and of course, after that, we'll move on to our next session about a conversation on the right with Ann Coulter and others. So please help me welcome Dimitri Simes.
Steve, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. I have to say that my appearance here is, I guess, a testament both to my loyalty and to my courage. Loyalty, because when Steve told me you should do it, so I came. And obviously to my courage, because I am not an Afghan expert by any stretch of imagination. The closest I came to Afghanistan was in 1985, and it was a place called Peshawar, which, as you know, is in Pakistan. And I was writing a column for Christian Science Monitor at the time, and I was meeting a number of people who were called Mujahideen, and some of them are still quite active, and now they are called Taliban. At this time, of course, the United States was training and arming these people, and they were good guys. And actually, I thought they were good guys, particularly considering the alternative. But this experience demonstrates, to me at least, that you always have to think about unintended consequences. We, I think, have developed a rather dangerous mindset in our foreign policy debates, when naivete is considered a virtue. As long as you mean well, who cares what the implications are going to be? And the implications of what is happening in Afghanistan may be quite serious, both quite fortunate and very tragic. Let me also say that when I think about what is happening about Afghanistan, I in a strange way think also about Richard Nixon and Carnegie Endowment. If you think about Nixon's earlier career, of course, Alger Hiss, then president of the Carnegie Endowment, was a very important part of how Nixon became a national statesman and how he became president of the United States. And when you think about Nixon's ultimate undoing, Obviously, it was not just Watergate, but it was his bitter vendetta with the liberal establishment that created a climate in which Watergate happened, in which decisions in the White House were made, and obviously a climate, the context in which these decisions were interpreted. One would think that Richard Nixon and Carnegie Endowment would never came together. But, well, life is stranger than fiction. A major part of Richard Nixon's political rehabilitation took place at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where we created a study group essentially around Richard Nixon and chaired by James Schlesinger. And it was that group, the group which discussed major strategic options for the United States and the short-term and long-term implications that eventually led to Richard Nixon creating a center, which was, as Steve remembers, was at first called the Center for Peace and Freedom, and now is called the Center for National Interest. Now, if Nixon could come to the Carnegie Endowment, and the Carnegie Endowment could host Richard Nixon, maybe it means that there are very few permanent rivalries. Maybe it means that when you look at any complex situation like in Afghanistan, and you should not ask yourself who your enemies are today. You should ask this obviously in a tactical sense, and you should go, to use Nixon's favorite expression, ruthlessly after our enemies. And that's what the US military is for, and they're doing it in Afghanistan quite well. But you also should see who among your current enemies may become not just a part of a problem, but a part of a solution. The fact that they're doing terrible things to us today, well, in war, people do terrible things to each other. And I'm sure that the Afghans would have their share of horror stories about American aircraft, drone attacks, unintended attacks on civilians, and etc. What is important for us when we look at Afghanistan is to think about the day after. The day when we would not have a major presence in Afghanistan, when we would not be a principal party responsible for Afghan security and ultimately for implications of Afghanistan for the United States. I think that we need to start by remembering how this war has started. And I was trained as an American historian many years ago at the Moscow State University, and that was not Moscow State in Idaho, but Moscow State in a country that no longer exists, the Soviet Union. And when I think as a historian at American history, there are few wars in my mind as justified as the US war in Afghanistan. If there was a war of necessity, this is, I think, a prime example. The United States was attacked on American soil. It was a major attack. 3,000 innocent civilians were killed. It was not an accident. It was a deliberate decision. It was a decision by an organization which already had a record of terrorism. And mind you, while they did not control Afghanistan, they were really hosted by Taliban, and Taliban was given an opportunity to get rid of them before the United States launched an attack. And Taliban said no. Under those circumstances, I do not know any reasonable and informed person who would seriously challenge that the United States had a strong course in terms of American security, in terms of US national interests, and if you wish, American moral responsibilities, first and foremost to the American people, to go into Afghanistan and to remove Al-Qaeda. That was the just war, the war of necessity, and I think that we have to be proud of doing it quickly and decisively. But then the mission began to change. First, we became involved in another war, which was not a war of necessity, but war of choice. I'm talking the war in Iraq. And of course, the United States is a superpower, and they know that we have resources to fight several wars like that, at least for a limited period of time. But you live in Washington. Many of you, if not most of you, know people in the government. Some of you know policymakers. You know what? Washington has a limited attention span. You cannot fight two wars with the same degree of determination over any extended period of time. It is just humanly impossible. And I don't think it would be controversial on my part to say that by 2004, 2005, it was Iraq, not Afghanistan, that became the principal preoccupation of the Bush administration. And what was happening in Afghanistan was not getting enough attention. And it was not getting enough attention in many respects. We did not have enough boots on the ground, and we did not have enough information in terms of active intelligence, but most important, our policymakers were not sufficiently focused on Afghanistan. They were thinking about Iraq much more. And so we found ourselves in a situation when we are fighting in Afghanistan for almost 10 years, and there are some gains, there are some encouraging new events on the ground, but basically the war is far from being won. And if you would ask, what is American mission in Afghanistan, it's very difficult to get a clear answer. What you normally get is a laundry list. And you know, laundry lists, they're wonderful when you need to testify before congressional committees and to make sure that no interest group would be offended that their interests, that their perspectives are being neglected. But when you are fighting a war, a major war, you need to have a list of priorities. You need to make a clear decision that you would be prepared to have trade-offs, and that trade-offs may be pretty unpleasant. I do not believe that the Obama administration, and I do not believe that the Congress have seriously and ruthlessly, and I use the term ruthlessly intentionally, approached the need to establish priorities. When you approach a major war, you don't need just to fight it ruthlessly using your military. You need to be ruthless also in terms of determining your priorities, in accepting, as we do every day with our own budgets, that you cannot have everything, that not every noble goal is achievable. We do not want to do it somehow when we approach Afghanistan. We're acting like our resources are unlimited, like our patience will last forever, and like what we're doing in Afghanistan does not come at the expense of other major interests and priorities. Mission creep is the name of the game in Afghanistan. And I think that we have to think about Afghanistan and reassess our options there seriously and promptly. Let me say second, that I do believe that defeat in Afghanistan is not an option for the American Republic. Because when you think about a real defeat, like cutting and running, the consequences would be ominous. It's clear that Taliban would come back to Afghanistan and would take over the country. It is clear that there would be no rationale for Taliban not to host Al-Qaeda. It is clear that there would be another major terrorist base for the whole region. It is clear that it would be a major embarrassment for the current government in Pakistan and can further destabilize the situation in that country. It is clear that weak, semi-failed states in Central Asia may be also candidates for Islamic fundamentalist takeover and also can become basis for terrorism. It would be a major disaster for the United States with unforeseen consequences. And I do remember that a lot of people were saying that this would happen to the United States in Vietnam. I don't buy the comparison for a very simple reason. In the case of Vietnam, we were dealing with a very aggressive and very brutal government, but the government which had no ambition to spread its power beyond Vietnamese borders. To the extent they would try to do it, there were the Chinese to check Vietnamese ambitions, and the Vietnamese had no record of any terrorist attacks or any other attacks against the United States outside the Indo-Chinese theater of operations. So for this reason, I think that we cannot afford defeat. I also think that we can easily avoid defeat. I had a number of conversations with my Russian colleagues about Afghanistan. And basically, you get 2 points of view, somewhat contradictory, but also mutually reinforcing. One point of view is, we wish the United States well, so get out. Because this kind of wars are unwinnable. We, the Russians, know that from our own experience, and don't stay there any longer than it would really take you to remove your troops. Second opinion is, Americans, we don't like you. So stay in Afghanistan. This war is unwinnable, and it would help Russia and anyone who really has concerns with American power that they would benefit from the United States being boiled down in the Afghan war. I actually think that both of these views are uninformed. Uninformed by Soviet-owned experience in Afghanistan and actually American experience in Vietnam. Why the Soviets were defeated in Afghanistan? Well, they were defeated because there was Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev with his new thinking, who came to a conclusion that the war in Afghanistan was not only too difficult, too costly, but he basically came to a conclusion that this was a mistake to start with, for the Soviets to go into Afghanistan, that no important Soviet interests were involved, and his principal priority was to establish a new relationship with the West, first and foremost with the United States, and he was making concessions in Afghanistan, not only easily, but I should say happily. On top of that, there was a very different situation with Pakistan. Now I'm well aware that Pakistan is playing both sides as far as Afghanistan is concerned today, but you cannot compare the Pakistani role back during the Soviet occupation. Pakistan was outright against the Soviet Union. Pakistan was openly arming and training the Mujahideen, and most important, the Soviets knew that they could not cross the Pakistani border in any shape or form. They were advised by the Reagan administration that that would be considered a hostile action, and the United States would offer a military response. I don't mean a nuclear strike against the Soviet Union, but local response on the ground. And mind you, it was not just the United States, it was also China, who was also supporting Pakistan. The Soviets were all alone in Afghanistan. They were really isolated. They had very limited alliances and even more limited options. With that in mind, isn't it remarkable that when the Soviet troops have completed their withdrawal in 1988, final and total withdrawal in 1989, for 3 more years, the Najibullah regime was surviving in Kabul, and actually for a couple of years doing quite well in combat. When did the regime collapse? In 1992, after the Soviet Union has collapsed. And there was Soviet government anymore, and it was Boris Yeltsin and the new Russian government who have stopped all supplies, all kinds of assistance to the Najibullah regime. It was only then that the Mujahideen were able to prevail and to take over Kabul. move back in history to the American-Afghan experience. The end of American ground presence in 1972, and yet the collapse of the 3-year government about 3 years later. And when did they collapse? When the US Congress have stopped practically all support to the 3-year regime. When that regime could not get fuel for their planes and tanks and had major shortages of ammunition, and if you look at what really happened, it wasn't even that there was a very successful North Vietnamese offensive, and there was, but also basically the Vietnamese lost their will to fight. And that brings me to a very simple point. There are options on the ground in Afghanistan, short of a full-scale engagement, which would allow the United States to maintain presence and to have considerable influence over the outcome. And that brings me to my conclusion. We need to define success, not in terms of our dreams and preferences, but in terms of what is really essential to the United States. And what is really essential to the United States, I presume, is for Al-Qaeda not to come back to Afghanistan. What is essential for the United States is to be sure that we do not have a hostile government in Kabul. And what is essential for the United States also, that what is happening in Afghanistan would not lead to destabilization of Pakistan. Every expert on Afghanistan I know argues that it can be done with a smaller and more focused presence. And that's what we need to consider, that's what we need to debate, and that's what I believe we need to implement. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Dmitry, thank you so much. Dmitry was not a member of the Afghanistan Study Group. The report, A New Way Forward, a report of the Afghanistan Study Group, which I helped organize a year and a half ago, outlines a set of thinking about American strategy in the region that Dmitry Simes on his own has come at this from a very different direction and has ended up exactly defining, frankly, the recommendations of the report, which I think I would recommend to those people who are interested, go to AfghanistanStudyGroup.org. And so I think it's no coincidence that one looks at these various equities that the United States has in the region, how you basically try and deal with a national interest frame, but don't get lost in binary choices of in or out. I think you come out with something that's a much more serious thing. We have time for just 1 or 2 questions before we move to Ms. Coulter. So let me just take here and in the back. Let's go to Gary Howard first.
Thank you for your talk, Dmitry. Just very quickly, is it your idea then that there should be no negotiations with the Taliban, that talking to the Taliban would serve no purpose?
I always thought that unless you plan to have a complete and unconditional surrender of the enemy, or total destruction of the enemy, unless this is what you're looking for, and you believe that this is feasible at an acceptable price, short of that, I think you have to talk to your enemies. That's normally how agreements are being reached. And I know that a lot of people consider this a very controversial idea. We should negotiate with our friends, or at least with those who respect and admire us. But that's not the way real diplomacy works. And let me say this about Taliban. They have done a lot of terrible things. But these are courageous and determined people. And they have deserved their place at the negotiating table.
This gentleman right here. If we can keep it very tight, I would be grateful.
My name is Rob Dubois. I'm a security advisor for the DoD. And I also was Izchov MGU in 2002. I was there for Russian studies. But my question is about Russian-American cooperation in the Afghanistan problem. Do you see any, besides the 2 houses of stay in, get out, because it's in their benefit, is there a bigger picture benefit?
Well, first of all, when I was talking about the Russian opinion, I was talking about unofficial Russians. And I have to say that if you talk to unofficial Russians, particularly unofficial Russians who are involved in foreign policy discussions, among those circles, admiration for the United States is usually well controlled. If you are talking about people in charge of the Russian government, whether you are talking about more liberal Putin, more conservative and nationalist, about more liberal Medvedev, more conservative and nationalist Putin, you're talking about more responsible and pragmatic people. And being responsible and pragmatic, they do understand that they have a stake. If not in American success in Afghanistan, they have a stake certainly in avoiding American failure. Because Central Asia is their back door. And a spread of Taliban and other fundamentalist movements into Central Asia is against vital Russian interests. The Russians also are subjected to the dangers of drug trade. And I know that in the United States, we talk a lot about that. But you cannot compare American problem to the Russian problem. The Russian problem is almost apocalyptic. They are dealing with male longevity today of 58, 59 years. And principal causes of what is happening to the survival of the Russian population, at least as far as males are concerned, is alcohol and drugs. They do not want drug-producing Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Also, last but not least, they were somewhat tamed by the financial crisis. They understand the importance of foreign investment. They did not learn, in my view, how to attract foreign investment. But they do understand that having a modicum of constructive relationship with the United States and the West in general is in their interest. So they are cooperative. They are not doing as much as we would want, as much as they could. But certainly they are helping in terms of transit across the Russian territory, helping with not pressuring too much Central Asian states not to provide bases and other facilities to US forces. And I think that there is a limited intelligence cooperation. This is not a behavior of an ally, but this is a behavior of a tactical partner on a limited issue.
Dmitry, before we close, let me just pose one last question myself. If I were to look at the foreign policy priorities of the United States right now, I would imagine on President Obama's list, Iran is rather high on that list. And thus, when one looks at relations with Russia, with China, moving various equities to deal with that, do you think the current course with Afghanistan that we have is emboldening Iran to sort of sense that the United States isn't a militarily overextended or complicated, that its bandwidth is sort of largely taken, and thus we're less effective in dealing and trying to influence Iran because of the Afghanistan course and strategy?
Well, first of all, we are clearly emboldening Iran, and when we think about our options vis-a-vis Iran, if you are a responsible policymaker, you have to ask yourself if we attack Iran, if we allow the Israelis to attack Iran, what the Iranians would do. And if you think about Iranian options, Afghanistan would clearly be an area where they would be able to do a lot and to create considerable damage. Let me say more broadly, when we think about US foreign policy, for instance, in the Greater Middle East, US and other NATO attacks on Libya, one reason many of us are concerned with US air campaign and other efforts against Qaddafi, frankly, is not because he does not deserve to be removed, but it's because that whether you like it or not, we are attacking another Muslim nation in a situation when US forces are fighting in Afghanistan. So the more we can localize, marginalize, reduce our involvement in Afghanistan, I think the more the United States would be free to pursue other important national security priorities worldwide. Steve, thank you very much.
Dmitry, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us. Very grateful. We are now going to invite Ms. Coulter to join us up front. Great. I know all of us, including myself, are very much looking forward. I have no idea where we're going to go in this next session, but I'm very excited about it. Let me just say a few words about Ann Coulter. A couple of years ago, I got a call from folks that were watching my website and getting into the metrics of measuring, and said, Steve, your Washington Note has just gone totally crazy. You couldn't get on it. It was kept breaking down, and folks were there. And I kind of got into the guts of it to look, and I had this blog called Human Events, or this website Human Events, that had linked to my blog, and I said, what is this about? And I had just written a comment about one of the criteria that Barack Obama may have used in thinking about Joe Biden is the notion that he didn't have many assets. And in the United States Senate, he ranked last in terms of his personal wealth. So I thought that was sort of a cool thing, and Ann saw it a little differently, but she linked to this blog, and it went through that. That's where my relationship with Ann Coulter began. And I was greatly appreciative for that link and have been hoping for more since. Ann Coulter is the author of 7 New York Times bestsellers. She's legal correspondent for Human Events, writes a popular syndicated column for the United Press Syndicate. She was clerked for the Honorable Pasco Bowman of the United States Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit. I worked in the United States Senate some years ago after I served as the founding director of the Nixon Center, and practiced law and private practice in New York City, but also worked for the Senate Judiciary Committee, so she's very much of this town, worked for Senator Spencer Abraham. We know her as a provocative, thoughtful, just Texas twister, I suppose, of sorts. But without further ado, let me invite Ann Coulter, and then, of course, after Ann speaks and offers her provocations, we'll have questions. But I've also invited another friend, Grover Norquist, and I'm going to say a word about Grover right now. Grover has been somewhat of a partner with me, and I think Grover's right behind the door here. Grover? He's missing his C-SPAN moment. Grover is president, of course, of Americans for Tax Reform. He's a member of the board of directors of the National Rifle Association, the American Conservative Union, as well as the advisory council of GOP Proud. He is the author of the book, Leave Us Alone, Getting Our Government's Hand Off Our Money, Our Guns, Our Lives. More important, though, Grover Norquist has been, I won't say a partner because I don't want your people to begin protesting you because of your relationship with Steve Clemens, but to get conservatives to talk about these vital issues is what this is about. It is extremely important that no matter where you are in the political spectrum, that the issues that we've talked about so thoroughly today get a fair hearing, get discussed, and this is something to create a conversation, in my view, on the political right has been valuable, and Grover's been a great ally and friend in that. So, Grover, I'm going to ask you to sit over here with me, and please welcome Ann Coulter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm not sure if you know this. I am not an expert on Afghanistan, but I am something of an expert on liberals. And that explains what we're doing in Afghanistan. Consider that our bombs cost more than anything we could possibly hit in Afghanistan. But Democrats don't care about the cost of the war. They don't care about the cost of anything. The only time it ever comes up is as an afterthought when they oppose some federal initiative for policy reasons. They view the American worker as a 7-Eleven to be robbed. We know they don't care about any programs unless you consider tax cuts a federal program. When it comes to missile defense programs, abstinence programs, or tax cuts. That's when we suddenly hear, oh, it's very expensive, we're concerned about the cost. Suddenly they become hard-headed fiscal conservatives. They think federally funded art therapy for the homeless, that'll pay for itself. But tax cuts, ooh, that's gonna break the budget. Free health care system for all Americans, revenue gusher. But taking out Saddam Hussein was apparently the one federal program that ended up costing a lot of money and bankrupted the country. After all of the Democrats' hysteria about Iraq, it's curious that Obama then sent more troops to Afghanistan. The reason liberals support sending troops to Afghanistan is that it serves absolutely no United States national interest. 3 weeks into Bush's war in Afghanistan, we had accomplished everything we were going to accomplish in that godforsaken area of the world. A popular liberal chant during the Iraq War, you'll remember, was, Saddam didn't hit us on 9/11. Saddam didn't hit us. Well, Afghanistan certainly didn't hit us. The Taliban had invited Osama bin Laden into Afghanistan to help deal with the Northern Alliance. They didn't want to attack the United States. Mullah Omar had no idea what was coming. Really? Do we have to attack the United States? Couldn't we just go after those Kurds in the north? Afghanistan has never, unlike many Muslim countries, it's never exported violence to go out and kill the infidels. Their various tribes fight one another, but they don't export terrorism. Afghanistan has always been the invaded, not the invaders. So after the 9/11 attack, America's only interest in Afghanistan was to take out the Taliban, kill or neutralize Osama bin Laden, take out al-Qaeda's bases, and quarantine the entire country. We had accomplished that before the end of 2001. So why is Obama sending more troops to Afghanistan now? To quote one of liberals' favorite arguments against the war in Iraq, what would victory look like in Afghanistan? Afghanistan is one of the most illiterate nations in the world. It's sort of a Wild West country with more goats than flush toilets. What are we going to accomplish in Afghanistan? The war there is just going to bleed us and bleed us and bleed us with no purpose, with no idea of victory. And the only reason for this is that this was a Democratic talking point against George Bush. Both in 2004 and 2008, we kept hearing that Afghanistan was the good war. It was Iraq was distracting us from the good war in Afghanistan. That's because immediately after 9/11, liberals couldn't very well say their proposal was unilateral surrender, which it was. No, let's attack no one in response to 9/11. So they pretended to support the war in Afghanistan, except Michael Moore, and then spent the next 7.5 years trying to distinguish Afghanistan from Iraq. Iraq was a war of choice, whereas Afghanistan, the good war, that was a war of necessity. And I ask you, was Michelle's trip to Spain a trip of necessity or a trip of choice? Neither Afghanistan nor any country attacked us on 9/11. Both Iraq and Afghanistan were sheltering associates of the terrorists who hit us on 9/11. So either both the wars were wars of choice or both were wars of necessity. Maybe for their next trick, Democrats can tell us why fighting Adolf Hitler was a war of necessity and not a war of choice. Because Adolf didn't hit us on 9/11. He never hit us, never planned to hit us. But Obama says, he's explained why that was a war of necessity. Nazi ideology sought to subjugate, humiliate, and exterminate. It perpetrated war on a massive scale. So what, Saddam was just moody? Obama won't admit that his enthusiasm for war in Iraq was just a line on a campaign trail. So now we'll have to be in Afghanistan for 30 years without end so that Democrats can fulfill a line they used against Bush in the campaign. This is the essence of Democratic foreign policy. Liberals made fun of Sarah Palin for not being able to define the Bush doctrine. Can anyone define the Obama doctrine? Even Obama can't define it. The reason liberals can never explain their approach to foreign policy is that if they said it out loud, Americans would burn them in oil. Since Vietnam, the Democratic Party has supported foreign intervention only if it serves no interest of the United States. If it serves our national security interest, they're hysterically opposed to it. Let's review the history of liberals' intervention in the Middle East, or as I call it, the Great Pyramid Scheme. It was, of course, President Jimmy Carter's masterful handling of war in Iraq or Iran that led to the Shah being deposed and Islamic fundamentalism getting its first real foothold in the Middle East, a calamity we're still dealing with. Even as Carter was backstabbing this loyal United States ally in Iran, the Shah was assuring those around him, don't worry, the United States has always been our friend. We can count on them now. There's no one there to warn him. There's a Democrat in the White House, run for your life. This little exercise in democracy led to Americans being held hostage for 444 days. We were standing tall under Jimmy Carter until that giant swimming rabbit came along. Democrats are all for meddling in other countries. Thus, for example, liberals loved Clinton's misadventure in the Balkans, which posed no threat to the United States, served no U.S. national security interest. To the contrary, Clinton bragged at the time. This is America at its best. We seek no territorial gain. We seek no political advantage. So why are we there? Liberals see the United States military as their little do-gooder project. After all of liberals' prattle about Saddam Hussein not being an imminent threat to the United States, we're apparently only allowed to attack a country if they are moments away from launching a first strike on America. What was Slobodan Milosevic's threat to the United States? Yugoslavia posed no threat whatsoever to the U.S., not imminent, not latent, not burgeoning, not now, not ever. No, liberals were proud of that. That's if you don't count all the U.S. highway deaths caused by Yugos. Clinton compared the Balkans to stopping a hate crime. That's what we use the taxpayer-funded U.S. military for, stopping a hate crime. If Milosevic was committing a hate crime, Saddam was committing a hate holocaust. While, despite Madeleine Albright and Secretary of Defense, poetry writing secretary William Cohen telling us that hundreds of thousands of civilians had been killed by Slobodan Milosevic, when the International Criminal Tribunal went looking, digging up bodies, they found a few thousand bodies, most men of military age. Meanwhile, Saddam Hussein had gassed hundreds of thousands of his own people, had used chemical weapons against hundreds of thousands of his neighbors. But only in the case of Iraq were liberals hysterical that America did not have sufficient reason for going to war. They wailed that we were intervening solely to effect regime change, which one pompous liberal after another told us was an illegitimate reason, regime change. Why did they think we were bombing Slobodan Milosevic? Was that to preserve his regime? And what is Obama doing now in Egypt and Libya? Community organizing? You'd think Democrats would at least wait a few years after their hysteria over Iraq and regime change is illegitimate and there's no imminent threat from Iraq. Just wait a few years before intervening in Libya and Egypt. But no, with liberals, history always begins today. It's unfair and illegitimate to quote what they said yesterday. Bush has already removed the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, won a war in Iraq, and established a pretty well-functioning democracy. He's turned Middle East leaders, despots, into really sort of pussycat despots who are terrified that Bush would invade them, as we know from Mubarak rushing to the British after we invaded Iraq, saying, "Is he going to invade me next?" Through all of that, Democrats were carping and naysaying everything we did in the war on terrorism. But now that the country's rolling in money, they want foreign interventions every place. Libya, Egypt, escalating pointlessly in Afghanistan. Where were the demands for humanitarian interventions back when we were taking out the guy with the rape rooms? You know, the one who gassed his own people, invaded his neighbors, was desperately seeking weapons of mass destruction. Where were the demands for democracy in the Middle East when we were actually establishing one? No, liberals couldn't have been less interested in establishing democracy in Iraq. If turnout had been any higher in Iraq's first election, Nancy Pelosi would have had to fly over to aid the insurgents. So it's really adorable seeing them get all choked up about democracy in the Middle East now. In places like Egypt and Libya, where our intervention is far less likely to succeed. But you just can't get Democrats to focus on national security. They really care about domestic policy, redistributing income, and they'll throw troops around the world to make it look like they're tough on national security. Say, as long as liberals are so gung-ho of getting rid of out-of-touch, overbearing dictators, how about starting with Janet Napolitano? Why did they want to keep Saddam Hussein in power again? What was liberals' interest in that? All they said was Saddam was 5 long years from developing a weapon of mass destruction. Well, we invaded in March 2003, so by my calculations, that means by March 2008, Saddam would have total control of the Middle East. What do we do then? They keep saying, what about North Korea? What about North Korea? Well, yeah, once they get a nuke, it becomes a much trickier problem. The truth is, for those of you already familiar with my work, they were opposed to going into Iraq because the war in Iraq would serve the United States' national security interests. Staging long, pointless, never-ending wars in Afghanistan, Egypt, and Libya, that's the kind of war that liberals like. Oh, you know, another country where Obama was not interested in democracy. Yes, Iran. Iran is ideal for democracy. It has a young, pro-Western, highly educated populace, but it's led by a messianic loon, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So why upset that apple cart? Everything's working fine. When peaceful Iranian students were out on the streets protesting an election that had been stolen in 2009, about 18 months ago, we didn't hear a peep out of Obama. The students had good reason to think the election had been rigged in some pro-Ahmadinejad districts. Turnout was over 100%. Wait, no, I'm sorry. I was thinking of Al Franken's election in Minnesota. But there was a lot of vote stealing in Iran as well. But when it came to Iran, liberals could not have cared less about peaceful protesters not decapitating mummies. When Iranian protester Netta was shot dead in the street, Obama responded forcefully by going out and having an ice cream cone. Then a year later, liberals are hopping for democracy in Egypt. They're all for the protesters, decapitating mummies, shooting guns in the air. Mubarak supported US policy, used his military to fight terrorists, recognized Israel's right to exist, or as liberals call it, 3 strikes and you're out. Obama didn't care about peaceful protesters protesting an election where we knew what the outcome would be. The guy who won the election would become president. He didn't care about the Kurds being gassed by Saddam Hussein. But Egyptians start decapitating mummies, and the Democrats are hot for democracy. Obama said of the Egyptian protesters, "We hear your voices." He didn't hear Netta's voice. He didn't hear our voice. And we were Tea Partiers protesting right outside the White House. As long as Obama could hear the Egyptian voices, I wish he'd ask them what they think of Obamacare. Maybe they could change his mind. Democrats' main argument against Mubarak was the high unemployment figures in Egypt. Remember, they kept talking about, oh, they're all out of work, no one can find a job. Have they seen the US employment numbers? Are we one jobs report from liberals rioting in the streets? Then Obama ordered airstrikes in Libya. As many have pointed out, he didn't support the rebels when the rebels actually overturned the despot. It's only, he jumps in when the rebels can't take the despot. Now we're on the losing side. Excellent. And the timing couldn't be better. Qaddafi has just given up his nukes and paid, and weapons of mass destruction. He invited the UN inspectors, international inspectors in to show that he had given up his nuclear program after we invaded Iraq. And also recently paid admitted culpability in the downing of flight, what was it? The flight over Lockerbie, paid each of the families $8 million. Why are we taking out Mubarak now? Only Bill O'Reilly seems to think we're taking him out to pay him back for the Lockerbie bombing. Because the only reason to get liberals to support American intervention someplace is that it serves no interest of the United States. That's why for the past 50 years, Democrats have orchestrated one humiliating foreign policy defeat after another. In Vietnam, in Somalia, Korea, Title IX, the list goes on and on and on. Time and again, Democrats' fecklessness has emboldened Americans' enemies, terrified its allies, and we're seeing that all over again. I believe this was the actual slogan of the State Department under Jimmy Carter. Yes, here it is, U.S. Department of State, emboldening American enemies and terrifying America's allies since 1976. The incontrovertible lesson of history is, if at all possible, don't allow Democrats anywhere near foreign policy. And nope, I know what you're thinking, but not even to keep them away from domestic policy. There's always a conflict of interest when people who don't really care for America are asked to defend it. For 50 years, Democrats have harbored traitors, lost wars, lost continents to communism, sheltered America's enemies, defended America's enemies. Their utter incompetence at national security is bad enough when the economy is booming. But we're not exactly rolling in money right now to be going on these pointless foreign interventions staged by Democrats to prove they can be trusted with national defense. This was, incidentally, why Lyndon Johnson said he was escalating the war in Vietnam. He wanted to show that Democrats could be trusted on national security. It's always the same thing with these Democrats. So I guess now we're going to pay for Democrats' never-ending foreign interventions in Afghanistan, for example, right now. I don't see an end to that. With all the money we'll be saving with Obamacare. I'll conclude now with a quote from the only liberal or the only man who knows liberals better than I, Tail Gunner Joe McCarthy. He said, if liberals were merely stupid, then the laws of probability would dictate that at least some of their decisions would serve the interests of the United States. And that is what we're seeing over and over again here. I understand some of you are also against the war in Iraq, so I will very much look forward to question and answer period. Thanks, you've been a great audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much. You know, it's fun. I spoke over the weekend with Arianna Huffington and thought for a minute we might have an interesting sort of back and forth on this, but I thought what is very important in this discussion, as I said before, is to get a conversation on the right. And so I get your frame. It's not exactly mine. I'm going to invite Grover to share it. But before I go with Grover, just something to think about. Another encounter I had with Ann Coulter, that I think the nation had, was so important. When Michael Steele, then chairman of the Republican National Committee, came out and basically said this war the administration's directing is sort of doubling down on a failed strategy. Michael Steele was somewhat severely attacked, not by liberals, well, they were attacking him too, but he was also being attacked by a lot of Republicans, some of whom you know. And you came to his defense, and you wrote really an extremely articulate national interest set of concerns about the Afghanistan war. And so when we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit too, how was that? How did it come out? Because Bill Kristol, Bob Kagan, some of your other friends in the Republican Party were also, at least on the Obama side of the equation of that, and would love to get going. But Grover, your thoughts and comments. Why don't you join us here?
Thank you. It was at a dinner that you hosted a couple months ago that I raised what I thought was a not terribly ambitious goal, suggesting that those in the center-right should have a conversation about the costs and the benefits, the purposes, and the end goals of the American occupation of Afghanistan, and to ask, what are we doing and how long are we staying and what's it going to cost? And there was some criticism, but we did, I think, in the center-right begin to get a conversation going. And I want to first talk about sort of why we didn't have a robust conversation over the last 10 years and why it's difficult getting it going. And I think there are a couple reasons. One is there's no draft. So there are a whole bunch of people who don't have skin in the game and who don't enter the conversation. Part of it was that it started under Bush's watch, and Republicans were reflexively just supporting the president. And of course, Republicans all cheerfully voted for Bush when he said we're going to have a humbler foreign policy and not get wrapped around the axle on places that you can't pronounce, and in Yugoslavia and Somalia. And we weren't going to be doing that sort of thing anymore. And Republicans said, fine, yes, good. And then when he decided not simply to knock out the Taliban government and try and kill the leadership of al-Qaeda, but decided to stay and turn Afghanistan into Kansas, people continued to say, okay, and there wasn't a conversation that, wait a minute, we went from kindler, gentler to jumping on top of another country and occupying a rather large country with a history of not being appreciative of being occupied, and getting involved in all sorts of tribal matters that perhaps we didn't understand as well as we might. And yet, because it was sort of a Republican president doing, a lot of Republicans said, okay, and let it slide, and you didn't have a conversation. Then you also had something that seemed to me sort of the flip side of Vietnam, where Republicans, center-right people, remembered the left being very harsh in their criticism of American troops during Vietnam, and all of a sudden, support the troops became the phrase that was used when the actual statement was, stop questioning the president's policies, okay? And it was as if you didn't wish to continue the occupation of Afghanistan, then somehow you were like for leaving the American troops there and taking the food and the weapons and the supplies with you home and leaving them in, I'm not sure anybody had suggested that, but somehow if you weren't for the policy, you weren't for the troops. And I think kind of runs the other way. If you're not being supportive of the troops, if you're not thinking through how best to protect them and to make their work and their sacrifice worthwhile and successful. Now, normally you'd think conservatives, center-right, elected officials, activists, who demand a cost-benefit analysis of every EPA regulation, as they ought, haven't been making the same request when lives are at stake and a great deal of money, $100 billion or more to occupy a country whose GDP is not $100 billion. And then we have the question of, on the center-right, what is the conservative foreign policy? And I think since the end of the Cold War, since Reagan, that's not clear. I mean, you could make a list of things that what do Republicans or Reagan Republicans think on the Second Amendment, on taxes, on spending. You can write those down, and you have just about unanimity on a number of those issues. But when you get to foreign policy, it's a big question mark. Again, Bush could have gone either way. Ronald Reagan decided not to occupy Lebanon when our Marines were hit in Lebanon. He didn't say, we will now stay and manage your civil war here for you for the next 15 years. He actually said, we're not going to stay and be in the middle of your civil war. And the Lebanese had a perfectly fine civil war all by themselves. It didn't require our supervision or our financing, and it ended no better or worse than it would have if we'd sat on top of it and then left one day. And so is there an opportunity, is there a reason for optimism that perhaps we can have a conversation on the right, a useful conversation? I think yes, for a couple reasons. There was some interesting polling data that said 2/3 of conservatives think everything we've done to Afghanistan up until now has been worthwhile, which is sort of respecting the troop sacrifice, deferring to Bush's judgment, and then 2/3 also want to do something radically different in the future. Okay, you might look at that and say, what happened last week that makes sense? But I think it does make sense if people don't want to dishonor the sacrifice or get into a conversation about, have we been wasting money and lives for some time now? But okay, setting that aside, now, looking forward, what do we want to do? Something dramatically different. And that gives us an opening that if we don't spend a lot of time trashing Obama and Bush's decisions up until this point and instead focus on why are we here? What are we doing? What's the benefit? What are the costs of continuing this? And what are the opportunity costs? I mean, if we weren't spending the lives and troops and money there, what could we be doing with the time and the effort? You know, so one, the public is willing to have a new conversation. Two, for the center-right, this is, as Ann pointed out, this is now Obama's war, so this should be sort of ollie in free. Everybody on the right is now allowed to think for themselves on this subject. We're not following the Republican president in this conversation, and with the increase of the number of troops, it's actually become a different operation and a much more expensive one. I emceed a panel discussion at Cato with 3 Republican congressmen a number of months ago, and I asked them off the record, in private, what percentage of Republican members of Congress believed the continuation of our sitting on top of Iraq was a wise move, not knocking out the dictator, but staying and managing and being on top of Iraq, this shoestring from Afghanistan to Iraq. And the 3 of them said, all. I think it was a mistake. And I made them answer the question again, because I was expecting 10, 20, 50, who knows. They said, all. And so you have this conversation among Republicans who don't feel they have, on the House and Senate, who don't think they have permission yet, somehow, to ask tough questions, and yet that's breaking free. So I think there's some real opportunities, and again, reason for optimism. There is no political structure within the Republican. If somebody said, I think it'd be a really good idea to go steal people's guns, I can assure you that within the Republican Party and the conservative movement, there's a structure that says, no, 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 you're not allowed to do that. I happen to manage the structure that says, and don't be raising taxes either. But there isn't anything within the center-right which draws lines in the sand on a foreign policy of a question like Afghanistan. If a Republican presidential candidate said, I think we should shift and decide not to occupy Afghanistan for the next 10, 20, 30 years, there may be 5 op-ed writers who would send him nasty notes, but there's no vote against that. There's no primary you lose. There's no structure or institution that draws a line in the sand and would want to have this knockdown, drag-out fight. So for all those reasons, I think we have begun belatedly. And I tried to go through why did it take so long? Why is it still taking a while? Why hasn't it moved faster? But why is there optimism to think that we can have these steps forward? And again, the inarticulateness of the criticism and of you by those people who said you can't do that. When I suggested we have a conversation, Max Boot said that was laughable to ask for a conversation. And a couple of the guys said, well, Grover's just called for leaving Afghanistan tomorrow. Let's see. I suggested we should have an open conversation about the costs and the benefits, and the people who are advocates of the status quo believe that if you had a conversation about the costs and the benefits, everyone would want to leave. That's not exactly showing a robust defense of their position in life, and it reminds one of the old joke of Honecker, the East German dictator who, towards the end of East Germany, turned to his wife, or his wife turned to him rather, and said, why don't you open the Berlin Wall and open it up? And he was kind of surprised because she was pretty loyal communist and everything. And finally, then he smiled, he goes, oh, you just want to be alone with me. Because he had sort of taken the several steps and decided if you opened up, everyone would leave, which is not exactly showing a great deal of faith in his creation in East Germany. And again, those who want to argue for the status quo, or a version of the status quo with the occupation of Afghanistan, who want to try and shout down a conversation, are really telling you that not that we believe they have no arguments. I'm open to listening to their arguments. I've been waiting 10 years for an explanation and an argument about why this makes sense, and I'm open to that. But they evidently don't think they have any. And that's kind of damning when you think about it. Thank you.
Grover, thank you very much. Thank you. Let me invite Ann to the podium, and then we'll take some questions. And maybe I can just open with that question about the Michael Steele case. You said it was one of the most quoted and known pieces that you had written about Afghanistan. What was that like? And you framed this as Democrats versus Republicans, but there's a piece of Republicans versus Republicans that you got into somewhat ferociously, and I still think that there are echo effects of that.
Yes, interestingly, well, Michael Steele made these comments about Afghanistan that were secretly taped, though I think they should have been publicly taped. They were great statements, and something I had been saying over and over again on TV. What is our purpose in Afghanistan? It's the reverse of what liberals say. Iraq was the good war. Afghanistan, we were done in 3 weeks. I mean, it was great the first 3 weeks. After that, it was unnecessary. This is basically what Michael Steele said at this Connecticut fundraiser, and suddenly all of these Republicans attacked him, including my friend Bill Kristol and Lynn Cheney. So I wrote a column titled, he said Michael Steele had to be fired, so I wrote a column titled Fire Bill Kristol. And I got more response to that column, and positive response, than any column I've written probably in a few years.
Even from liberals.
A lot of conservatives. And I think the reason a lot of it came from conservatives is a little bit what Grover was saying. We're so used to, and by the way, this is an excellent rule of thumb. If Democrats say black, we say white. You will be right 90% of the time, probably 98% of the time. And so liberals, so hated the war in Iraq, they hated even the first 3 weeks of Afghanistan. Republicans genuinely like the troops, as opposed to liberals who hate them but pretend to like them. And so when a lot of Republicans, I think, sort of feel the impulse to support any foreign intervention. They don't remember Vietnam. They don't remember that Democrats' idea of the military is that they are, I don't know, well-dressed and well-armed Boy Scouts out doing charitable work. And, I mean, if you look at the two sort of extremes to make it clear, you have, I'll call it the Republican position. The military is to be used to promote the interests of the United States. We wish other countries well in their civil wars, as Grover mentions, but if we're going to be risking American lives and a lot of American money, then it ought to be to put America in a better position. No one, I mean, even Bush, even Republicans will never say it that clearly. So the first Gulf War, which I was against, and I think I was against because the first President Bush didn't explain it more clearly. I don't know much about the Middle East. If he had just come out and said this is a crucial area of the world for the United States, including oil. And by the way, this idea of going to war just for oil, of course we should go to war for oil. It's like saying you're going to war just for oxygen, just for food. We need oil. That's a good reason to go to war. But no, the first President Bush said, oh, it's because one country invaded the other. Whenever they start talking about the military being used for humanitarian purposes, for nation-building purposes, if you think the military is to be used to promote the interests of the United States, you get sort of confused. If Bush had spoken clearly and said, this is in America's interest, we need, this is the central area of a crucial region of the world. We can't have this lunatic going in, taking over countries. It will stop the oil flow, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then I would have supported it. At the other end of the spectrum, and again, an extreme example, I mean, yes, the president is the commander-in-chief, but what if Obama sends the US troops to the Bahamas to build Disneyland? Does the Constitution allow him to do that? He's the commander-in-chief. Isn't it implicit in the idea of the commander-in-chief of the armed forces that they're supposed to be doing what armies do and not building Ferris wheels in the Bahamas? I'm not sure how that would ever come up legally to go before the Supreme Court, perhaps in an impeachment, but I think the humanitarian goals are similar to building the Ferris wheel. That's not what the military is for, in whether it's Somalia, I guess in Iraq, though the reason I supported our forces staying in Iraq to oversee the nation building was something that, again, Republicans won't say clearly. We wanted a puppet government, or at least, let's say, a friendly government. That's in our interest, to make sure that democracy doesn't lead to, them voting in Osama bin Laden. Otherwise, why did we spend all that money invading? We want a friendly government there. So to keep some troops there to oversee the transition, which even a Republican president will promote as the idea of, well, we're helping the people, we're helping them build their democracy. No, from our interest, we're helping them build a government that is not going to turn and start sheltering terrorists who will then fly planes into our skyscrapers. So I think that is the clear division, and the reason I keep being so repetitive on the point that liberals only support a war as long as it serves no interests of the United States, is that it's hard to believe. It seems like Ann Coulter hyperbole. But if you go through the history of the interventions they support and the ones they oppose, that explains liberals. I'm not sure what explains Republicans who support wars where none of us can see any advantage to the United States. I don't know what motivates them.
But there are some.
There seem to be some.
Yes, I go to Gary, and then we'll go to Kami, and then we'll work on the rest. Gary Howard, Voice of America.
Good afternoon. Given your position that you're taking, what I haven't heard from either of you is a clear call that you think then that the funding for the war in Afghanistan should be cut off. And given the budget cutting or deficit cutting tsunami that's going through Washington, why don't we hear more of this coming from your adherents or followers in the Tea Party?
That's a good question. I mean, Grover could answer on the Republican, actually elected Republicans better than I could, but I think it's because of what I said at the beginning just now of how Republicans have this instinct, and Grover said it in terms of support the troops, of always supporting this country going to war. They forget about things like Somalia, Bosnia, Vietnam. When Democrats are sending the troops, it often has absolutely nothing to do with making this country more secure, safer, serving our interests. But I mean, it's just like you just get in such a habit of always supporting sending the troops there, and you've been fighting these MoveOn.org lunatics and the Code Pink people, and okay, it's American troops, then we're for it. I think there are some, although I was surprised by the response to my column, Fire Bill Kristol, that a lot more conservatives understand the point I was making than I thought.
Yes. Tommy, but? And we'll keep it brief, Tommy.
Sure. You proved liberal wrong by dating a Muslim guy, Mustafa. I just wondered that if your dating experience with him influenced your approach toward Muslim country or Muslim
I'm glad
society.
you asked. For one thing, his name is not actually Mustafa. I just called him that as a nickname. And I mean, he's more right-wing. We're still friends. He's more right-wing than I am, and just incidentally, on 9/11, he pretty much gave up Islam. And I think we're a few tweaks away from making him a Christian. In any event, he's an American. He escaped the communists, or his family escaped the communists in Tito in Bosnia to go to Syria. Then he escaped Syria to come to this country. He's an American. He would agree with everything I said, and yes, he did influence me. Everything he said about immediately after 9/11 turned out to be true, including, I kept saying, but why is Saddam shaking his fist at the United States, daring us to invade? And he said, oh, it's all a matter of saving face. It wouldn't even matter if he had weapons of mass destruction. In that area of the world, he has to shake his fist at the United States. Otherwise, he'll completely lose face. And although we did find weapons of mass destruction, and we do know, thanks to Joe Wilson, that clown Joe Wilson, 2 major investigations, both in Britain and here, Saddam was seeking enriched uranium from Niger. And General, what's his name, George Sada, says that Saddam moved his stockpiles. I think he says they moved them to Syria. Okay, we didn't find the stockpiles. But he was trouble, and I guess, unlike a lot of you, I am a big supporter of the war in Iraq, even more than George Bush. Apparently, it's down to Dick Cheney and me. Huge fans of that war. I think it was important for 8 billion different reasons. I think we need an Arab Israel. We need a democracy of Arabs someplace over there, and you do have that in Iraq. We accomplished that.
You have it in Lebanon. You have had it in Lebanon.
You have had. Yes, perhaps that would be. That and Iran, I would be more interested in regime change in than Libya, Egypt, and whatever we're doing in Afghanistan.
Right here, Robert.
Thank you. A couple questions, very quick. If the Taliban had given up bin Laden, as we demanded before we went in, do you think we would now be in Afghanistan?
Excellent question. No, I don't.
Okay. If we had succeeded in killing bin Laden, which was our original purpose, what I consider the first Afghan war, which had a purpose, would we still be in Afghanistan? And then finally, if the world were exactly the way it is today, except for our presence in Afghanistan, is there any reason why we would then go into Afghanistan today?
And first, on the first question, if they had given up Osama bin Laden, that would also be and his al-Qaeda camps. We would go in and take all of them out. It isn't just this one man, and that became kind of a liberal myth. This idea, the chants you'd always hear. Where's Osama? Where's Osama? Why haven't you caught Osama? Well, okay, we destroyed the al-Qaeda camps. He's on the run. He's hiding in a cave someplace. It's not like, you know, if you took out Kenny Rogers, all country music would die. It is the whole network. So we needed to take out the al-Qaeda camps and Osama bin Laden. If we had killed him, I think it probably, I mean, one thing I sort of disagree with Grover on, and maybe I'm underestimating how much effort and lives were being spent by the Bush administration, but my recollection was we pretty much wrapped things up in 3 weeks and left some troops behind. You know, spending some time looking for Osama, spending some time making sure al-Qaeda didn't emerge again, but there wasn't a lot of money, and as I recall, at the end of the Bush administration, there were very few deaths from Afghanistan, particularly compared to Iraq, whereas the deaths of our troops have gone through the roof since Obama came in, and something they don't talk about. We used to get those constant lists of troop deaths from Iraq. How about getting them from Afghanistan since Obama's become president? And for what point?
Ray? And then, in the mic.
Thanks.
Keep it
Yeah.
brief, Ray.
Real brief.
I'll try to be brief too.
2 points. One point is the stolen election in Iran. You know, that election wasn't even disputed, like the one we had here in 2000. Ahmadinejad run fair and square. We got to get over it. The question I have for you is this. You said, and perhaps you're right, that Ahmadinejad gave up his nuclear program.
No, Mubarak.
No, Qaddafi.
Good, Qaddafi, sorry.
Okay. I think you said.
No,
okay.
yeah,
I'm sorry, I got that wrong,
I'd
because
like
that
to
would have
go
been a
into
good
Iran.
result, right? Okay, sorry.
She didn't say Mubarak, but she meant Qaddafi for those watching.
Oh, sorry.
that it was Qaddafi, and I think it's an extremely important point, if I may, because while, you know, I think we're in this era of distraction right now, that right now the 900-pound gorilla that we should be paying attention to is Egypt, and there's not a lot of attention to Egypt because we're spending a lot of political chits on Libya.
Right.
We've got a lot of stuff going on in Afghanistan. But there have been these meetings with North Korea recently. North Korea is sending signals that it's going to begin misbehaving again because it sees us as militarily overextended. And by the way, there's going to be no strategy at all to get North Korea to give up its nuclear weapon systems because we've just invaded a country that had given up its nuclear weapons and systems and program. So the disincentives that now have become huge for other governments in the future, the whole calculus has changed.
Right.
And so negotiations with North Korea to get rid of nuclear weapons fundamentally don't make.
That's a good point.
I just want to, Ray, you're into this business well, and
Sure. Yeah, I'm just pointing that 2003 was a very important year because that's when Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon, and I thought I heard you admit that, but I guess I was in error. Thanks.
No, 2 points. Sorry about that. Qaddafi, Mubarak, Barak. I can't keep these Muslim names straight. And no, liberals were wrong about Ahmadinejad giving up his nuclear program. Remember, that's another thing they lied about. We kept hearing about all our intelligence agencies, and for those of you who watch MSNBC, that's all we heard about for a week, how Bush had to apologize to gentle as a lamb, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, because our intelligence agencies had determined that he had given up his nuclear programs. And then, oops, December 2009, Ahmadinejad announces we're nuclear. Oh, well, I guess for the 8 billionth time in the last 5 years, the CIA was wrong. There's where we could save some money, you fiscal conservatives. Just shut down the CIA because Walmart has better intelligence.
This lady right here.
Thank you. Lisa Savage with Code Pink. In attempting to understand U.S. foreign policy under a succession of administrations, I'm curious why you overlook the role of the immense profits for corporations that build weapon systems, contract security services, and so forth. It seems to me a very large factor, yet I'm not hearing that.
Thank you. Profits, companies.
That would be one of the advantages of the war. Obama's spending all this money on stimulus bills. Oh, we're providing jobs for public school teachers. If that were true, I'd be more in favor of it. Except, alas, it doesn't serve the United States national security interests.
Yes, right here. And while we're waiting, I just want to ask one other question here. Haley Barbour, I don't know exactly what it is. Haley Barbour has begun, I think, of the major possible Republican presidential contenders, has come out and expressed a lot of concern about Afghanistan in the last week. Howard Dean, interestingly, also yesterday basically said we need to get out of Afghanistan. You see some doing this. But on the whole, I haven't heard Mitt Romney, Mitch Daniels, Pawlenty, Sarah Palin, and others kind of line up yet and kind of call this Obama's war and that we need to do it. But do you think that dynamic's going to begin to build among the Republican presidential hopeful set?
I think that is a tricky issue for them, the same way the birther issue is tricky for them. They don't want to be annoying people who might otherwise vote for them, and especially in a primary, and you still do have Republicans who have, I think, kind of a knee-jerk instinct to support any foreign intervention. And I mean, it is kind of Republicans' fault for not speaking clearly to the American people. George Bush #1 with the Gulf War, George Bush #2. And, you know, at the time when Bush gave that speech 24 hours before we went in, he went on TV at like 5 p.m. East Coast time. I don't know if you remember it. And he said, "I am speaking to you, the Iraqi people. Your days of living under oppression, of rape rooms are over." I thought it was a brilliant speech, but I think perhaps it could have been made clearer. We have 17 reasons to take this guy out. And the first 16 serve America's interests. And by the way, it's also going to be good for the people of Iraq. But we weren't going in for humanitarian reasons. And because Republicans have this instinct to not appear as an imperialist power, which is insane. America is the only non-imperialist superpower in the history of the world, and yet we're constantly having to explain ourselves. There were a lot of reasons for Americans to want to go into Iraq to serve America's interest, to take out this danger to that whole region, to stop his weapons of mass destruction program, to have a functioning democracy in the Middle East, to terrify Qaddafi into giving up his weapons of mass destruction program. There were a lot of reasons to take him out and none to keep him in.
Great, and we'll take the last question.
Steve, this panel, having a very different panel at the end, I thought was a little strange, but now I really welcome it. I think it was a really good idea to end on comedy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll take one last question, but very brief.
Yes, I think you mentioned Republican presidential candidates being afraid, perhaps, to come out because of angry voters. I think while we've heard a lot of good arguments during the whole day about getting out, that you and Grover and some of your colleagues could perhaps do more than any of the arguments if you were now willing and not afraid to call out Republican presidential candidates for not taking the right position on Afghanistan, so that some of the teabaggers and other conservative voters would be more accepting if they did.
I'm not sure I'm taking advice from somebody who calls them teabaggers.
Well, I really want to thank you. Again, when Ann Coulter linked to my blog, it really did create this flurry of traffic. Lots of people came in, brought in a whole new audience. And I've got a great line for another Human Events column saying, if you had an extra $119 billion, would you go spend it on a country with $14 billion of GDP? If you just kind of went down that way and started the conversation, then today would be a great success. So I want to thank Ann Coulter. Very great to be here. Grover Norquist, thank you. On behalf of the Afghanistan Study Group, the New America Foundation, all of the folks that participated in today's program, those in the back behind the wall on the other screen, we've been in overflow all day. I want to thank you all very much. But again, another round of applause, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
You are absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
You are spectacular. Ridiculously good.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you
This
so
was
much.
fun. It's nice to have conservatives.
Can I mob you right here?
Yes. Nice to meet you.
Please forgive me for being centrist. My wife's in the English.
Oh, excellent. You married a good woman.
Yeah, I picked right. She's more chaste. But I'm a retired student. I'm very good at war. I'm very good at
Right.
the author of How Peace Documents Balance.
Oh, okay.
Deal around for a second.
What about innovation? French intervention, long revolution, was there a value in sea poverty in the greatest America? Arguably, we would have got an answer.
Interesting example. I love the French for helping us with our magnificent revolution, but look what happened to them. Look, they spend so much money, and then you get a revolution, and the king is executed. I mean,
absolutely.
It couldn't have ended up worse for France. God bless them for helping us, but it destroyed France. Okay, good. I'd like to see your webpage. Oh, excellent. Oh, good. Okay, great. I'm going to look that up. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Hello.
Daniel, that was really good. I just want to clarify one thing. That if you look at the history of what was going on prior to Iran, the humanitarian community played a big role.
I know.
See, that
and then they pulled out.
Yeah.
No, we met Leno's wife.
Yeah.
Suddenly she wasn't interested in Afghani women.
I was a neighbor of Katie.
Oh, really? Are you from Wyoming?
Well, my father was teaching at the University of Wisconsin, and his wife and we were neighbors.
Oh, I love dictating.
We loved it. Her
Thank
jokes.
you.
Look, gets in the way of the other half of the appreciate.
I think it hits. Thank you. Yeah, not like John Stewart.
National airport. I go to National Airport. And I said yes. I usually say yes. They tell me that all the time. For the last 10 years. But I said. I found out the agent signed reporting my activities to the White House. Fired. Now I'm waiting to be arrested.
That's very good.
Hey, can we clarify something real quick on camera? I want to follow up on the question about the funding.
Well, not to get in.
What I wasn't clear on was when you actually support the idea of
I think so. I mean, you can't just cut off the funding. They have to make. Sure.
Yes. I'm sorry, right here. Hey, you got it.
Yes, but Republicans can't just quietly
It's not possible within the Congress.
We are the party that cares about the defense of the United States. And Republicans whether Washington in Afghanistan serves any interest in the United States whatsoever. And explain, and therefore we are going to cut off money for this war. They can't just quietly do it. So I wouldn't talk about it exclusively in terms of funding. I talk about it in terms of you are wasting money on campaign talking. But if Democrats want to attack the war in Iraq, they kept elevating the war in Afghanistan to be all the good war, distracting us from Iraq. Well, no, we did everything we needed to do in Afghanistan in the first 2 weeks. What are we doing there now? Afghanistan, they don't export terrorism like many other Islam nations. They fight among themselves. It's a tribal society, Wild West. What are we going to do there? We don't have space, something like 7%. What are we doing there? We're not going to build a democracy like Iraq. We're not taking out one great people like Saddam Hussein, feverishly working by weapons manufacturing. What are we doing there other than Democrats trying to prove they can stop?
But the Afghan war was not even on the political discourse in the last election. I think it's going to
Question. I certainly think all of these misadventures in Egypt and Libya, while simultaneously Obama turns his back on.
But I hope you meet him in dialogue.
I mean, as I indicated, Iran is another excellent country for regime. Looking around the globe, where do you have literate pro-Western populists who provide Let's get her to Iran is number 2 after Iraq under Saddam Hussein. That's a great country for regime change. And we have an opportunity. We didn't even have to send troops. I mean, there are various levels of what a president can do to support peaceful protesters like Netta and the rest of Iran. And he says that he goes after an ice cream there. He turns his back on Netta, but now is sending rebels in Egypt and Libya better for us than the leaders? I don't know. I don't think we know that.
On the idea that Republicans, and I guess all politicians, don't want to hear about this, which makes, I guess, cutting funding for Afghanistan will be a difficult one.
I don't know. I think they can make the case for it. I mean, especially if you lay it out with all of these Gorbachevs Democrat wars. I mean, Republicans do fight wars because it serves America's national interest. And I mean, I sort of thought of that when I was talking about the cost-benefit analysis. I don't think we should do that for national security.